In Moscow, Western diplomat...
It's almost midnight. A group of 4 men, 2 locals, a Pole, and an American tourist are crammed in the back of a van on their way to the outskirts of Kiev, Ukraine. The American keeps looking over his shoulder. The Pole nervously fidgets with the strap of his camouflage backpack. A police car passes by, and all 4 men slump down to avoid being seen. None of them have ever met before this evening. They gathered on an online urban exploration forum, a place for hobbyists who tour abandoned ruins, when someone promised them the unthinkable. A break-in to the highly radioactive Chernobyl Exclusion Zone, the site of the worst nuclear disaster in human history. There are official tours, of course. Now, decades after the accident, a thriving tourism industry developed with a wide selection of trips, lectures from historians, scientific excursions, even dramatized adventures that guarantee thrill and danger. But some still choose to jump the fence. They're called Stalkers. Smugglers who accompany small groups in and out of the zone and act as illegal guides. The driver pulls the van into an empty parking lot where the stalker is waiting. He doesn't look like the smuggler type, just about 20, in a graphic tee with a band logo, carrying a light backpack fit for a summer hike. He gets in and starts chatting with the nervous passengers. They drive for a few hours more on uneven dirt roads, deeper into the forest. Out the back window, the city lights fade, phones lose service, and the radio starts to crackle. Without warning, the van comes to a stop. "Get out," the driver says. 60 seconds. The group frantically gather their equipment and jump out. The van speeds away. They'll have to continue on foot. Chernobyl's exclusion zone consists of 2 layers of security to sneak through in order to get inside. The first is an outer perimeter 10 kilometers thick, lined with barbed wire fences and guard stations. The Stalker passes around this flask of vodka and they all take a shot, the traditional way to start a trip into the zone. When a gap in the patrols reveals itself, the group rush out from the bushes, cut through the wire fence, and sprint for the tree cover. Next comes a long trek through dense woodlands. They march in pitch darkness, single file, avoiding the roads. Spring frost covers the trees like glitter, and cold wind cuts all conversations short. After several kilometers, they reach an abandoned village. Chernobyl and the city of Pripyat are peppered with leftover Soviet towns that worked the collective farms, and after the disaster, they were evacuated too. 40 years have passed since then. It must have all happened in a hurry. The doors were left open, and nature got into the cottages and sheds, rotting everything. Forsaken shoes, toys, and gas masks are strewn across the floor. The clock on the wall is stuck at 1:30, the time of the nuclear disaster. They set up camp in the living room, eat some food, ration out the water. If they're lucky, another stalker or a friendly tour guide left a hidden stash of beer. The night is silent, save for the echoes of distant gunfire from the military training in Pripyat and the howls of wolves in the forest. Next morning, the trip only gets more dangerous. They will be easier to spot in the daytime, and the second border is heavily guarded. Constant patrol shifts roam between the posts, and the roads are swarming with cars. Official tours arrive on buses and wander the buildings. Logging companies work in the forest. Wealthy foreigners fly overhead on VIP helicopter trips. If the stalkers are caught, the punishment can be serious prison time. And as they continue towards the center, people cease to be the only danger. There is a constant threat of radiation. Its main source, the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, has since been safely contained, but the blood it spilled across the land 40 years ago has not yet dried. Most food and water they find is dangerous to consume. They can't light a fire to keep warm because the wood releases cancerous smoke, and entering certain buildings can cut their life expectancy by half. And then, there's the E.Y.E River. It stretches across the southern side and acts as a third border to their destination. They can't go around, and taking a bridge risks running into patrols. So they cross. The temperature of the E.Y.E can drop into the minuses and freeze their clothes solid, so the 5 men strip naked. They wade in where the river's low, march in single file, water rising to their chins. After excruciatingly long minutes, they reach the other side. The stalker laughs. He knows they'll have to do it all again, on the way back. Brave all this, and inside the zone, you'll find a hidden community. In camouflaged campsites, in basement shelters, in the heights of the deserted apartment blocks, is a secret society of stalkers who call this place a second home. The story I told you is an amalgamation of real experiences belonging to the 600 or 700 people who undertake this journey every year, who risk fines and arrests and health and their lives to get inside, who always come back again. Why do they endanger themselves so much for this desolate wasteland? How did this subculture develop? And why does it matter? To find out, we have to look back at a landmark video game series, a Soviet art film, an obscure sci-fi novel, and the story of Ukraine as a nation. This story starts in the mid-80s. Madonna is topping the charts. The internet is born in a university basement. Nuclear tensions between East and West are at their highest since the Cuban Missile Crisis. Halley's Comet passes by Earth for the first time in 76 years. First signs of an AIDS outbreak that will last years rears its head. The video game industry crashes. And somewhere in northern Ukraine, a few dozen kilometers from Kiev, among the birch trees, a small black spot appears on our planet.
There has been a nuclear accident in the Soviet Union, and the Soviets have admitted that it happened.
Massive quantities of radiation have apparently been released in an accident at the Chornobyl power station in the Ukraine.
What caused it, and how many people did it hurt?
In 1986, due to a combination of operator error and faulty Soviet construction, the Chernobyl nuclear power plant explodes. Over the coming days, it spews radiation carried by the wind across all of Europe. 100,000 people are estimated to have died. 300,000 were displaced. An area of 2,500 square kilometers is made completely unsuitable for human life. Now, 40 years later, the Soviet Union has fallen. We've learned to treat AIDS. Video games are bigger than ever, and Halley's Comet is on its way back. But the black spot remains. Chernobyl's exclusion zone will not be safe to return to for 24,000 years. The power plant itself, where uranium is still emitting radiation, will be deadly for up to 4.5 billion years. Andrei Drozdov, a Soviet scientist who visited the region shortly after the evacuation, said that in all things there is the breadth of irreversibility. This is the first time we, as a species, have completely erased a part of our world. And what are we left with? An obsessive fascination that haunts our imagination. It won't leave my mind. I've watched the documentaries, the dramatizations, read books, delved into the science. Pictures of it make me feel small. No matter how far I may be from it, in time and in distance, it's always there. Monolithic, silent, eternal. The cursed underworld behind a locked gate. There is so much incorrect information and pervasive legend to Chernobyl, and it's precisely because it feels like the last place on Earth able to inspire mythology. I've always been content watching from afar, but as the first generation of Ukrainians born after the tragedy comes of age, they can't just stay away. They have to find ways to live alongside the dragon sleeping on their doorstep. So what compels them to break in? Well, it depends on who you ask. The first, shortly after the zone was closed off, were Iron Men. Sporadic, unorganized looters, usually ex-convicts, who would risk prison to scavenge metal for profit. And there was plenty to scavenge. After the evacuation, the army left so much equipment in the military facilities. Even now we cannot be sure that all of it has been found. Additionally, all the tools and vehicles used during cleanup after the disaster were so irradiated that most of them were left behind. They pile up in machine cemeteries, deep in the forest. Although collectors would likely pay a high price for some of these antiques, getting large objects out of the zone is tricky, and that's not what lured looters inside. Within this equipment is silver, gold, and platinum. A small handful of scraps can be easily smuggled out and sold for $300. To put that into perspective, the current minimum monthly wage in Ukraine is $200. Next came the historians. They break in to see Pripyat, the city Chernobyl workers lived in, but they're there for more than just some crumbling tower blocks. You see, Chernobyl wasn't just a normal city. During the Cold War, the USSR believed nuclear power could be the key to creating their egalitarian utopia. The promise of infinite energy from the atom, unleashed by human ingenuity, free to each according to his needs, became powerful propaganda. They began to build nuclear cities around power plants, and Pripyat was to be one of the biggest. 2 sports stadiums, 3 indoor pools, state-of-the-art cinema, 10 gyms, 27 restaurants, and a palace of culture. Modernist tower blocks, colourful with constructive art. Young people, high wages, plenty of foreign exotic goods, flowers everywhere. The power station was planned to house 12 reactors, the energy output of which would dwarf anything in the world today. And these nuclear cities became an advertisement for the USSR. There wasn't a building that did not feature a hammer and sickle on the facade, a square without a statue dedicated to some heroic achievement. One of them, bronze and 6 meters tall, in the center of Pripyat. Prometheus, stealing fire from the gods for the benefit of all mankind. We all know how that story goes. When the Soviet Union collapsed and Ukraine gained independence, it underwent a process of decommunization. Anything that glorified the regime that subjugated them was to be removed. The statues were demolished, the symbols scrubbed away, street names changed. Every last Lenin and Red Star was destroyed. But due to the danger of radiation, Chornobyl Exclusion Zone was spared the bulldozers. Inside its perimeter, the USSR still stands. Its utopian nuclear city paused in time. It's the biggest museum in the world, not only to the regime, but also to what it believed itself to be. An invincible empire that would last forever. A few years later, we start to see official trips. The zone has become the epitome of disaster tourism, and it attracts the type. Thieves, delinquents, social media influencers, and worst of all, Americans. Their tour guides are more than willing to play into this tragic fantasy. They're the ones strewing gas masks and children's dolls all over the place, arranging apartments to look hastily evacuated, turning the clocks to the time of the disaster for a neat photo op. And as quickly as the tourists appeared, so did stalkers who act as volunteer custodians. One group dedicates themselves to preserving the zone as it originally was. Though they're never seen, their work is felt. The trash of tourists disappears, plants are trimmed, the furniture returns back to its proper place, and with a fresh coat of paint. Another group has different ideas. They want to discourage tourism by smashing the lustre that attracts people to visit. They deface the place, litter popular spots, and demolish landmarks. The most notable battleground of these two groups is the Pripyat sign. At first, it was repainted to its original grey, then covered in graffiti, repainted grey, smeared with garish colours, repainted grey, tagged in protest with words across a Ukrainian flag that read, "We make money from tragedy." By now, enough factions have developed in the zone for ideological differences to develop over what to do with this sleeping dragon. Last time I checked, it was grey again. But it's not all about the past. Some look to what this place could be. Artists have broken in to create new expression and ascribe new meanings to the zone. Chipping Soviet mosaics give way to murals to those who risk their lives to clean up after the disaster. Experimental installations make use of the abandoned junk and give it new purpose. Once, a group has even freed the safety bolts that hold the rusted Ferris wheel, a popular tourist spot, and set it in motion again. Ravers host parties, events like Pripyat and Chernobyl, DJ sets, movie screenings. Abandoned warehouses come alive with homemade cocktails, barrel fires, and glow sticks. Some see it as a playground. Thrill seekers accomplish daring stunts for nothing more than bragging rights. They course expeditions further than anyone has gone before, scale the skeletons of tower blocks, parkour across rooftops, climb to the very top of the Dugar radar, where the whole zone can be seen, and fly. A reasonable question you may have is, how do they prevent becoming irradiated? How do they deal with the fact that every day spent inside is slowly killing them? The answer is that most don't. No dosimeter, no radiation is a popular stalker proverb, and it's reflective of a nihilistic mindset among young Ukrainians. For almost 200 years, Ukraine has been subjugated by the Russian Empire, and the oppression only ramped up during the time of the Soviet Union. The country was reduced to labor, a factory and a farm. Any attempt to get out from under the imperial thumb was met with punishments like the Holodomor famine, a genocide caused by Stalin that killed almost 4 million Ukrainians. The nuclear utopia of Chernobyl wasn't for them. High positions were staffed by Russian immigrants, and Ukrainians were left to do the grunt work as usual. The disaster was the last gift the regime gave them before collapsing. The fire the Soviets stole was returned to the gods, and Ukraine now bears the birds gnawing at their liver. For a long time after Chernobyl, the country was sick. Newborns died within days, and those who survived suffered horrible defects. Oligarchs took hold of the government and corruption became widespread. Imperialistic Russian influence carried right on. And so many young Ukrainians with little prospects and a growing nuclear disease began to see themselves as permanently tainted, the same way that little black spot has blemished our world. What's radiation to them? If you've been cursed from the day you were born, then what's a few years knocked off your lifespan? So they break into the zone for reasons they can't explain. Victims of national trauma, returning to the summer camps where they spent their childhoods, the homes their parents lived in, and come up with their own ways of facing this place. They have become a community. Stalkers maintain a network of hidden camps and stashes left for others. Online forums trade tips, routes, and stories. Experienced stalkers mentor new members, and they have begun to self-police. even leaving wanted posters for those who steal or damage the zone. What used to be exclusively young men now includes women, old people, and there's a mutual respect between all of them. You can visit the Chernobyl Exclusion Zone on a tour, wander its deserted streets, and not know that another society exists here, parallel to the world outside. It would have remained a niche Ukrainian hobby, if not for an indie video game series created by a dozen people in 2007 that brought the Stalker culture to the world.
Good morning, Pripyat. Welcome to 0451 Zone Radio. I'm your host, Steffi. That was Owen with He Was a Good Stalker. Always tears me up, that tune. Lost a few good friends to the zone myself, but I can tell you all about that over a drink at the 100 Rads. No fret though, the zone belongs to the living. It's a beautiful day today in northern Ukraine, no emissions on the horizon. Now I'm seeing a lot of new rookies around, artifact hunting, so here's some tips. Don't eat the berries. That's how Dushan went. Avoid the west unless you want to catch a bullet from a bandit like Ibrahim. And for God's sake, don't step into anomalies like Paul and Coletti did. Those nasty things will destroy your mind. And your body too, if you're lucky. Anyway, that's all from me. Stay safe out there, stalkers.
Stalker, with full stops, is a game series created by a small team of independent developers in Ukraine. It imagines the Chernobyl Exclusion Zone as a mythological place that, shortly after the disaster, became filled with supernatural dangers and miracles. There are new ways to die. Alongside radiation, anomalies appeared which break the laws of our universe. Fires that burn forever without fuel, puddles of corrosive slime, sentient hostile moss, gravitational fields that can crush or whirl you into a pulp. Mutated creatures reared their heads, some animalistic, and some almost humanoid. Yeah, that's an anomaly too. There's new treasures. Crystals that can heal any wound, jelly that creates infinite electricity, artifacts that, if studied, could revolutionize science and fix the world's problems. And that's not all. Some even say that the zone is a living being. It speaks to stalkers, drawing them in or pushing them away, planting ideas in their heads. It disrupts signals, blocking contact from the outside world. It gets angry, igniting the sky fury red, causing emissions that fry brains and transform the zone with new dangers. According to the newly released sequel, the zone seems to be expanding as well. This all serves to create the atmosphere of an untamable alien world. No matter how long you spend here, you can never feel like you understand it. It's bigger than us. If you stay too long, eventually, it will kill you. Like a giant who, turning over in its sleep, without even noticing, crushes our empire of anthills beneath its weight. And yet, we still come. Why? Stalker is primarily a game about clashing ideologies. Each entry to the series centers around conflict between its cast of factions. We have the military, who, similarly to real life, came here first and tried to take control. Hundreds died before they realized it wouldn't be possible. Bases were established and lost. Maps were drawn by trails of bodies and outdated by the next emission. Eventually, they gave up and decided to try to contain the demon instead. The military now operates a border around the zone to make sure that no one gets in and, more importantly, nothing gets out. But not all called it quits. Judy are a faction of military defectors who kept fighting. They see the zone as an existential threat to humanity that needs to be destroyed, no matter the cost. As with nuclear power, which spawned the zone to begin with, and has since been corrupted into weaponry, maybe humanity cannot be trusted with these miracles. Studying the zone is only tolerated as far as to find its weaknesses. They exterminate anything else. The Judy faction speaks Russian, and not by accident. This philosophy of imposing total control and destroying undesirable opposition is seen in Ukraine as distinctly Soviet. Interestingly, the Ukrainian military in-game also originally spoke Russian, and there's a historical reason for that. When the first game was being developed, the military in Ukraine was seen as a leftover tool of the Soviet regime. Corrupt gangsters who made for good video game bad guys. But as Russian aggression grew and the Ukrainian military proved itself, this attitude shifted. They became more favorable in the later games, protectors of the world from the zone's dangers. Then there's Freedom, Judy's main ideological opposition. A faction that believes controlling the zone always ends badly. This place cannot be beaten into submission. Instead, they see it as an opportunity the world can benefit from, and so it should be open to everyone. Sure, the zone is dangerous and it's unwielding, but so is the rest of the world. And we've done miracles with that too. Is it not in our nature to will the universe to our benefit? This anarchist attitude, in contrast, is seen as classically Ukrainian. A country with history of anti-authoritarian movements and uprisings so vast that it would take an entire other video to cover. They're also massive stoners. Another Russian-speaking faction is Monolith, zombified stalkers who got a little too ambitious, a little too greedy, a little too close to the center of the zone and paid the price. Something took their minds and stripped them of their past, turned them into shambling foot soldiers who wander the zone aimlessly and kill anything that moves. If you get close, you can hear them mumbling to themselves. Sometimes apologies, sometimes fading memories of home, sometimes doubts about why they're here, forced to kill and die, meat shields at the whims of some tyrannical voice in their heads that could not care less about them. I don't think I need to explain that one. These four are the main powers, but there are smaller factions too. Bandits consisting of criminals evading prison, sustain themselves on exploitation, smuggling, and hostage extortion. Mercenaries hired by corporations come in and recover artifacts, equipment, documents. State-funded scientists in research camps still try to find some understanding. What becomes clear is this is unlike any other faction conflicts you may have played. None of these groups are after precious resources or land or conquest. They're ideologically opposed. They fight over what the zone should be, what we should see it as, what the story we tell about it is. Like a religious crusade, they fight over perspective. The series featured a system called A-Life that simulates every single NPC within the game world. They're not just background dressing. They enter the zone, join factions, go out on missions, get into fights, make friends, and leave, one way or another. Early on, there was even a glitch that allowed NPCs to finish the game before you did. This system is intended to make the game feel alive and dynamic. You can begin to recognize people and find their corpses later on. But paradoxically, it also makes the zone feel more static than ever. Any progress one faction makes is undone by another. Any location they secure is taken back. Any enemy they kill is replaced by a new recruit. This creates a scenario where we come and go, and only the zone remains eternal, ignorant of our conflicts, indifferent to what we want it to represent. No one can win because there is no right answer. We're dealing with the unknown, a cosmic horror, a sleeping dragon. The game itself, mechanically, is a bit of a cosmic horror too. The early entries were prime Eurojank. That's a term you may not have heard before. It's a label that emerged with the rise of video games developed in Eastern Europe. The logic goes that countries like Ukraine are in this Goldilocks zone. They're rich enough to access high-budget Western games to play and learn from them, but too poor to have any formal gaming industry. This results in small development teams with ambitions that far exceed any budget, and video games that are creatively brilliant, but also very rough around the edges. Eurojank also has its own game conventions, and the most famous one is incredibly hard difficulty. Less challenging and more completely unfair. They're designed to cheat. You will die a lot, you will bash your head against the wall, and eventually you find a way not to win but to cheat back. Their worlds and enemies don't necessarily hate you, but they don't care about your role as a protagonist. And this appealed to a specific niche of Western players too, who got tired of the individualistic power fantasies that their industries kept churning out. These games are filled with senseless conflict, nihilism, depression, futility. The early Stalker games really earned that Eurojank badge. They barely hold together. But that serves to only add to their experience, because now not only the zone is hostile, but the game itself too. Stalker and the engine it runs on is also a mythological place full of dangers and miracles. If you want to get anywhere, you need to adjust to its quirks, adapt to its pace, and wrangle it in the right direction. Maybe that's why the fans of these games are so tight-knit. Strong communities are forged in the face of shared hardship, and this community is feverish. Every day the forums are filled with discussions, cosplays, music, art. They have created their own experimental radio stations, wrote 80 fan books about the zone, built entire new games together, even did their part in the war efforts. Until now, there has not been a new entry into the Stalker series for over a decade, but the community doesn't need any incentive to return, to jump the fence and find new aspects to it, to fix the engine and ensure new Stalkers have an easier time. Like the real-life Stalker community, you can't keep them away. In 2009, they organized Stalker Fest, a multi-day event celebrating the game and its culture in Kiev's central Maidan Square. Thousands of people came to play a demo of a then unreleased sequel. There were paintball matches, laser light shows, bands of all genres, and even the original creator got up on stage and sang. Like the real Stalkers in the Chernobyl Exclusion Zone, this community attracts all kinds of people, from teenagers in oversized gas masks to older fans in full cosplay, and they're all friendly. A man dressed as the leader of the murderous bandit faction was spotted handing out snacks. It's hard to get across how big of an event this was, but here is some perspective. The biggest gathering of people at the Kiev Square in recent history was the Orange Revolution. A mass protest sparked when a Russian-backed candidate became Ukraine's president after manipulating the media, rigging the vote, and even attempting murder of his political opponent. After threatening to bring the government down, the Ukrainian people managed to weed out this puppet. The second was the Revolution of Dignity. After Ukraine's president backed out of an EU deal to appease Russia, another wave of mass protests broke out. These went further and escalated into violent clashes with the police. Over 100 people died. The third was Stalker Fest. Now, it may seem absurd to compare this shindig to these huge historical moments, but this series has genuinely become a source of national pride. Games from Eastern Europe used to be seen as cheap knockoffs, and Eurojank was a derogatory term. But Stalker has since become a cult classic, and it is hailed as something that couldn't have been made anywhere else. Now, the trailers for their new sequel proudly state, made in Ukraine. A tragedy left to them by a fallen empire has become a symbol of artistic brilliance. It's a cultural touchstone. But when would-be explorers and looters first broke into the zone all those years ago, right after the disaster, the video game was still a long way away. At that time, it was a Soviet-era film that inspired them, and earned the practice its name. Stalker is a 1979 film by Andrei Tarkovsky. Think of him as the Soviet Union's equivalent to Kubrick. Although the two were artistic competitors and Tarkovsky hated him, the movie has a similar setup to the game. Something happened at a nuclear power plant and the surroundings came alive with wonder and danger. The military cordoned the area off, established the zone, and now it's a place would-be explorers break into. The story follows a stalker who guides two men, a writer and a professor, in search of a mythical room said to grant wishes. But that's not what it's really about. The twist is that nothing really happens. We never see anything supernatural. No mutant jumps out from a bush, or anomaly tears someone apart. When they eventually reach the mythical room, none of them even enter inside. And yet, you watch 10 Stalker reviews and you'll hear 11 different interpretations of what's going on in this movie. And to understand why, we need to first understand Tarkovsky's characters. Let's start off with the professor. He's characterized as an intelligent and calculated man, completely guided by logic, and approaches every situation in the movie with an atheistic skepticism. When we first meet him in the barroom where the stalker explains the rules to follow inside, he scoffs at some of the more superstitious ones. He believes in the magic of the zone only as far as a scientist does a credible theory, and tells the crew that he came to study these myths and stories, to determine which are real and how they work, and settle the legend of the wish-granting room once and for all. Maybe even win a Nobel Prize along the way. As they delve inside, he treats everything that happens like an experiment to be rationalized. Military vehicles that have rusted impossibly fast could be the result of a microclimate. Snow falling in the middle of spring could be dust from a nearby chemical plant. The professor, to me, represents an archetype of the modern Nietzschean man. He's faced with a miracle and his first instinct is to break it apart, rationalize, interpret, categorize. He doesn't believe. He wants to destroy the idea of belief, and instead impose his own will and power onto the world. Our other visitor is the writer. In contrast, he's a rich, famous artist living a life of hedonism. He arrives at the bar in a fancy car, already drunk, and with a woman he met on the way. The man is playful, sarcastic, and takes nothing too seriously. He tells the others that despite his good life, he has been struggling to write anything for years. He isn't sure what he should do, and so he came to the zone to ask the room for inspiration. Once they break in, the writer is immediately impatient. He protests and whines, ignores dangers he cannot see, and even tries to walk directly to the middle of the zone, straight to the room, before the stalker stops him. He's an artist. Irreverence comes naturally to him. Transgressing rules is his job. When the group make camp, we learn more about his philosophy. The writer tells us that all humans are still fundamentally animals. We chase our primal desires, drink and eat and fuck, guided by instinct. We're selfish creatures, and if we manage to do any good, it's only as a side effect. In my opinion, the writer is a disillusioned nihilist who serves as the exact opposite to the professor. Where one sees a brain, the other only teeth. The professor thinks we can reach the heavens. The writer thinks we haven't even left the caves. With these two men is the Stalker, the guide and our protagonist. We immediately see him as a pensive but fearful man. We never learn his religion, but it's clear that he's devoutly pious to his faith, and especially to the magic of the zone. He's been a stalker before many years ago, but he was caught and spent 5 years in jail. Now he's back, living in a rundown apartment with a disabled daughter and a long-suffering wife. He makes a measly wage, but it's enough to keep a roof over their head and provide for the family that needs him. And yet, he goes back to the zone. He can't keep away. Unlike the two visitors, the Stalker treats the zone almost like a religious site. God is watching here. The very first thing he does when they arrive inside is leave the crew to lie down, put his head to the sacred ground, and pray. Not to the sky, no, but down to the mud and the grass and the waters of this place. When the writer is revealed to have smuggled booze and a pistol in, The Stalker takes the contraband off him and drops them into the stagnant water of the river. He gives them back to the zone. It's implied that this is why the military were wiped out when they first arrived here. They brought their sins, their weapons, and their conflicts into the house of God, and were punished for it. When the professor starts to formulate his theories, the Stalker feels personally insulted that he would dare to try to measure and categorize these miracles. As his companions break more and more rules, he becomes increasingly angry. Angry that they can't see what he sees. Angry that every time he brings people to the zone, they always prod and test and doubt. They can never just believe. At one point, the Stalker breaks into a tear-filled tirade about the country outside the zone, about how there is nothing left in the world out there, no faith, no freedom, no beauty between the barbed wire fences that define imperial borders. The regime took everything from him, and here, in the zone, is the only place on Earth left uncorrupted. This is our rapture, our promised land, our Garden of Eden. This is heaven. Eventually, they arrive at the mythical wish room, but there's a catch. We hear the story of Porcupine, a stalker who came here after his brother died to wish him back to life, but instead ended up fabulously rich. The room doesn't grant you the wish you ask for. It grants you your deepest wish, the thing you really want. This changes things. For the writer, a man who believes humans are senseless, selfish animals, it only intensifies his doubts. He doesn't know how to live, what to write, but most importantly, he doesn't know what his true subconscious wishes are. It scares him. What does a depraved animal really want when it comes down to it? To the writer, we're too full of contradictions. We can't face God like that. The professor has a more drastic shift in attitude. The professor brought a bomb. The room is dangerous because he fears we'll use it the same way we use the rest of our world, to exert our power and will onto others. If humanity finds out about the room, every man will be a king, a dictator, a Führer. It cannot be allowed. He has to kill God. To him, we don't deserve the divine, not because we're too lowly, but the opposite. We don't deserve it because we all want to be masters. In the end, though, neither dare enter the room. They still don't believe. The crew returns back to the bar and parts ways. In my opinion, Stalker is about faith. On the surface level, yes, with imagery like the zone entrance being the light at the end of the tunnel, faltering power lines that resemble crucifixes, bricks that are arranged into ghostly faces, but also more deeply. Tarkovsky famously had the script rewritten countless times until the writers removed anything supernatural. He wanted there to be no proof or certainty that the zone is real. Instead, we're left with these half miracles. A rock that takes an incredibly long time to fall down a well. The wind changes direction. A phone rings. A light flickers. If you're looking for God, you can see him everywhere. But you may also find that there was nothing there at all. My favorite example is that the scenes shot outside the zone are in sepia, whereas inside it's all color. And it's because it's so intangible. Nothing changes within the scene. None of the characters inside the movie can perceive this, but we can feel it. It's not a science fiction expedition, it's a spiritual pilgrimage, a test of faith. The Stalker acts as a priest, guiding others, seeking people who believe in something in a world that no longer believes in anything. But to Tarkovsky, humanity doesn't want faith anymore. To him, there are two types of people left. The ones who want to break the world apart and control it, and those who want to live for pleasure, like animals. We don't deserve heaven anymore, but despite that, the film proposes that we still have a little faith left inside us. Sure, we can test, we can break rules, we scoff, we challenge and ridicule our guides. But when it really comes down to it, when we have a chance to finally defy God, we hesitate. Because what if it's real? Tarkovsky was an extremely religious man, and all of his movies hit these similar notes, which got him into a lot of trouble with the Soviet Union. Marx believed, with good evidence, that religion has historically been used as a tool of class oppression to keep the poor subservient. and so the USSR's solution was to operate under state atheism. Religious propaganda was forbidden, in media and in official matters. As you can imagine, for Tarkovsky this led into a lot of fights with the Soviet movie censors. Sometimes Tarkovsky would cut out the offending scenes, sometimes he would rewrite to make them more subtle, and once he even submitted fake scripts for review. When the censors caught wind of it, they ordered the movie he was working on to be destroyed. This persecution of faith comes across in the story as clearly as it was allowed to. The Divine Zone is cordoned off by an authoritarian military regime that keeps common people out. The world on this side is dark, poor, and decaying. The Stalker, with his shaved head and mannerisms of someone beaten down once too many times, resembles a prisoner. He lives in an empty house that shakes each day when a train passes by, with the rumble of a giant industrial beast patrolling outside. Or it could be about something else. Some propose that it's a metaphor for life in the Gulag. Some say it's criticism of nuclear power itself. Some claim the zone as the promised land of the West, seen from behind the Iron Curtain. To Tarkovsky, they're all correct. He was strongly against giving any explanations for his films, and his cinematography is deliberately neutral to allow you to form your own opinions. The movie didn't do well at first. It was too impenetrable for the audience at the time, and, as you can imagine, the Soviet presses didn't exactly leave the most flattering reviews of its messages. It may also have been the movie that killed Tarkovsky. Production of Stalker, similarly to the game, was a constant hell. Apart from the censorship, they had to deal with faulty equipment, sickness from cold and damp locations, and a leak that rendered the film from the first few months of shooting completely unusable. Remember that scene with the snowfall? That really was chemical runoff from a nearby industrial complex. And after breathing the dust in for months, many of the production crew died of cancer. 3 of them being the writer, Tarkovsky's wife, and Tarkovsky himself. But the idea of the zone didn't die with him, and it wasn't born with him either. To see where it all started, we have to turn back to Roadside Picnic, a 1972 Soviet sci-fi novel by the Strugatsky brothers. (1970), an inn in Komarovo. This is where the Strugatsky brothers, sci-fi writers so famous that they were read even in the West, conceived the zone. A lot of the common ideas you have heard throughout started here, but with some big differences. First of all, there are multiple zones. And second of all, there is no mystery. We know the zones were created by aliens who visited our planet, but left as quickly as they came. Maybe they ignored us, or maybe they didn't even notice. Like a family on a road trip who parks along the side of the road, lays out a blanket on the grass, eats some lunch, drinks some beer, rests in the sun for a few hours and, just as suddenly, gathers up their belongings and drives off. We were a roadside picnic to them, on the way to somewhere else. And that family leaves behind empty cans, tin-foil sandwich wrappers, a dropped pocket knife, an empty battery, tracked mud on boots from another meadow. So too these aliens dumped their trash here. That trash is now the treasures stalkers hunt for. The story takes place at a zone in the town of Harmon, likely somewhere in Canada, where an international institute was established to study it. We follow Red, a lab assistant there by day, a stalker by night. Stalkers here are different to the other adaptations, in that they don't have ideologies. They do it for rent. They're expendable, the lowest rung on the ladder of organized crime. The rats that squeeze through a fence or scale a wall as soon as it's built. In these first contact stories, the heroes are usually brave soldiers fighting off cosmic threats, or genius scientists forging peace with our galactic neighbors. But Roadside Picnic knows who'd really be there first: the prospectors. Whereas Tarkovsky's movie was distinctly anti-USSR, this feels, if not pro-USSR, at least anti-capitalist. It's no accident that the story is set in an American zone. We get a peek into the Soviet one later on and, like in the movie, it's a cordoned-off military checkpoint. Harmon's was too, until we discovered artifacts that could be sold, and things changed. Overnight, the town became a tourist destination. There are brothels and clubs. There are tour guides who, like in real life, scatter animal bones on the perimeter to make for spookier stories. There are immigrant workers who come here to be exploited in search of a better life. In this zone, we see people like Red endlessly sent to their deaths, in hope of finding a tin can that someone will pay a few hundred for, and then sell for thousands off in Europe. If the game imagines the zone as a political debate, and the movie a spiritual pilgrimage, the book is a blood diamond mine. And what are these treasures they die for? What do we do with them? The answer is we don't know, and not much. Stalkers find perpetual batteries that can power anything forever, and instead of solving the energy crisis of our world, we use them for our crappy cars to save on fuel costs. We find rocks that spark with some hidden internal process and fashion them into statement jewelry for the rich. Bracelets that seem to cure any disease, instead of being studied to revolutionize medicine, are sold a dozen at a time to health gurus. Like the lead we turned into pipes, asbestos into insulation, radium into glow-in-the-dark toys. The impossible becomes mundane. The dangerous becomes exploitable. They don't match the ideas we have of what a miracle looks like, and yet this mundane trash so easily shatters every founding pillar on which we built our world. At one point, a scientist brings up a theory that maybe these items are not trash, but some kind of test. Maybe the aliens are trying to see if we're advanced enough to understand them. Maybe they're trying to teach us. Maybe these are tools that can bring us into the next stage of our civilization. Well, regardless, we have used these gifts for baubles and sold them off for a few bucks. Miracles transformed into wage slavery. Whatever the test, we have failed. That's one interpretation of this zone, a capitalist blood diamond mine. But there's also another. A cosmic horror. The anomalies here are different. Sure, there are the dangers we've seen before. Slime that burns away your legs, silver webs that can cause heart attacks, gravity traps so strong they flatten you into a nuclear shadow. These at least have rules, clear cause and effect. But there are also ones more incomprehensible. Red's daughter, Monkey, was born with a thin layer of golden fur across her skin. Children of Stalkers are ridden with defects, which could be rationalized as some kind of biomutation, but the confusing part is that it's something that seems to only affect those who enter illegally. Most puzzling, those who live in Harmon at the time of the visit are forbidden from leaving because they're followed by statistical anomalies? Wherever they go, strange coincidences follow. The city they move to will have a rise in earthquakes, in water pollution, in violent crime, the price of bread, even car crashes. None of these are directly linked. It doesn't matter what they do, or where they walk, or who they talk to, but somewhere, in a government department, a graph inexplicably goes upwards. These anomalies defy any basis of logic. We can study them for years, analyze every detail, create theories, but we would come up short, because they are proof that there is some fundamental layer of reality that we are not aware of. There is something out there that we cannot control or understand. It's a cosmic horror. but we still try. Special attention in the book is given to the way things are named by scientists. The burning slime is called colloidal gas. The bug traps are categorized as graviconcentrates. 2 floating discs anchored together are referred to as a hydromagnetic trap, despite being neither hydro nor magnetic. Words fail us, and yet it seems like, to the scientists, the most important thing is to ascribe words. Until they give something a name, they feel lost and afraid. But when they find a label, their attitude shifts. There's a theory to hold on to. They think they figured it out. Stalkers scoff at this theory crafting, but they too have their own logic. On this expedition, we see Red avoid a hill because the grass looks wrong, or a truck because it reminds him of an unpleasant memory. He throws bolts in front of himself to test the air, but there's no process to it. It's all just a way to make him feel better, and Stalkers still die in their dozens. Because at the end of the day, all you can really do is take a step and hope nothing bad happens to you. Even the idea of a roadside picnic, the basic theory that informs everything in this book, is flawed. Do aliens have picnics? Do aliens take routes? Do they travel? Do they leave trash? Stanisław Lem, the Polish sci-fi author, called this idea that everything in the universe functions by the same logic we perceive the world as the myth of our cognitive universalism. There's a wish granter in this story too. But while Tarkovsky imagined it as a room, a space where God resides, almost a church, Roadside Picnic's wish granter is appropriately a dull, tarnished copper ball. The final chapter of the book follows Red and a young kid on their quest to find it. What would you wish for? Red asks when the two make camp before setting off deep into the zone. The kid, whose stalker father lost his legs to a burning slime anomaly, says that he wants his dad to walk again. Red laughs. That's not your true wish, he says, and asks what he thinks his real desire deep down is. The kid doesn't reply. After a long crawl through a burning swamp, they find the sphere. There in the distance, lying by the side of a demolished building. The kid is overjoyed, and emotions take over. He sprints right for it. Happiness, he shouts. Happiness, free for everyone. Red doesn't watch, but he hears the sound of a body being pulled into a bug trap and wrung out like a towel. All he feels is anger. Why does it have to be like this? Why do we have to toil under this hierarchy, one body after the other, to make some investor rich out there? Why is our world like this? As Red approaches the sphere, he can't seem to figure out what to wish for. At first, he wants to be a dictator, force everyone to do what he wants, so he can break this stupid system, but realizes that this is a wish made in resentment, and thinks again. Maybe he can repeat what the kid said. Happiness, happiness free for everyone. It's so naive and pure, but it doesn't mean anything. It just sounds good. A self-serving wish. In the end, he gives up trying to figure it out. To me, Red is the conclusion to every single Zone story we've seen so far. He doesn't try to ascribe his own ideology to this great beast, like the factions of the game. He doesn't see it as a god to worship or kill or cower before, like the movie. He doesn't want the prophet he's been chasing the whole book. He's faced with a cosmic horror, and he's the first character we see not to try to understand. I am an animal. You can see that I am an animal, he says to the sphere. I have no words. They haven't taught me the words. I don't know how to think. Those bastards didn't let me learn how to think. But if you really are all-powerful, all-knowing, all-understanding, figure it out. Look into my soul. I know everything you need is in there. It has to be, because I never sold my soul to anyone. It's mine. It's human. Figure out yourself what I want, because I know it can't be bad. A Dormant Disaster, a landmark video game series, a Soviet art film, an obscure sci-fi novel. a hidden community in the Chernobyl Exclusion Zone. I could talk for another hour about all the ways this idea of the zone, this mythology, manifested over the decades and captured imaginations. All the fine differences between how they work, the treasures, the dangers, the creatures, the secrets. But I don't really need to, because what the zone is doesn't really matter. What matters is the story we tell about it. When the town of Harmon was faced with the zone, the poor residents looked in and saw profit. The corporations saw a tourist attraction, and the scientific community, an itch on their brain that they couldn't scratch. Red saw truth. Tarkovsky's professor peered in and saw the whip of a slave master. The writer saw a dog ascending the steps of heaven, and his stalker saw God, the promise of salvation in faith. In the game, the military saw a caged beast gnawing at the bars. Duty saw a threat to our species, and freedom, the future of it. The real stalkers who break into the exclusion zone see the crumbling pillars of an arrogant empire, a wound to be mended, or a corruption to be destroyed. If you played the games, read the books, watched the movie, and went to see the place yourself, you would probably have your own story too. It would make you feel something different. These stories are what keeps a global subculture that has existed for half a century going. Its ideas have influenced countless other books, movies, and games. Its status has cemented it as a piece of Ukraine's artistic heritage, and its themes have helped a whole generation of people deal with the national trauma of a nuclear disaster. To them, and to me, Stalker matters. What do I see in the zone? Well, each of its iterations are different, but there is one common through line, one key theme. In none of these stories is the world outside any different. Behind the fence, it carries on. Economies keep churning, wars are fought, lovers meet, kids are born, and people die. And yet, they choose to come here, to our own little corner of the apocalypse, because they can't keep away. Because it's always at the back of our minds. Nothing matters, nothing can matter or be known about the world as long as this place exists. To me, Stalker is about the answers we give when we don't know what the question is.
Hej, tam gdzieś na czarnej wody siada na koń kozak młody. Czule żegna się z dziewczyną, jeszcze czule z Ukrainą. Hej, 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 sokoły, omijajcie góry, lasy, doły. Dzwoń, 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 dzwoneczku, mój stepowy skowroneczku. Hej, 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 sokoły, omijajcie góry, lasy, doły. Dzwoń, 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 dzwoneczku, mój stepowy, dzwoń, dzwoń, dzwoń. Wiele dziewczat jest na świecie, lecz najwięcej w Ukrainie. Tam me serce pozostało przy kochanej mej dziewczynie. Hej, 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 sokoły, omijajcie góry, lasy, doły. Dzwoń, dzwoń, dzwoneczku, mój stepowy, dzwoń, dzwoń, dzwoń. Wina, wina, wina dajcie, a jak umrę, pochowajcie na zielonej Ukrainie przy kochanej mej dziewczynie.
Like the zone, this video too is paused in time. Right now, there are no stalkers in Chernobyl. Ukraine is a different place, where thousands of people are dying in Putin's invasion. Stalker 2, the latest depiction of the zone, was developed during this hell. GSC has worked on it through the global COVID pandemic. They've worked through a fire that burnt down their server room, through an attack that led half of their team to evacuate, through cold nights sleeping in the office because there was no heat at home, through the deaths of their co-workers and their houses being shelled. There wasn't a day where Russian hackers were not trying to bring their studio down, and yet they kept working with one hand and fighting a war with the other. This game is a real achievement of spirit. It has been a morale booster to the people working on it, a vessel for their emotions, and, like for Tarkovsky, it has been a piece of resistance against an oppressive regime. This video was a pleasure to make, through months of intensive work to have it done in time for the game's release, but you can probably tell that it was also full of anger. Please, if you're interested in this world, I would encourage you to buy Stalker 2 and support their team. If you're interested in the story of its development, something I didn't have time to cover, watch their own documentary, Wargame, here on YouTube. If you enjoyed this video and felt like it would be worth paying for, donate that money to United24, Ukraine's official fundraiser. I will be donating not only all the money this video has made, but also all the money this channel and Patreon have ever made, from the very beginning. Thank you for watching.